Good afternoon, George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. Let's build Mike's mobile library. Today I'm going to pick up where we left off in our previous session, where we were talking about maintaining the relationship between publications and the authors who create those publications. It's a many-to-many relationship that we handle with the junction table. One of the tools that I had to use to maintain that we had a pair of galleries on a screen, and to maintain those galleries in sync with one another, with the publication and the author, and the third gallery, which had the junction table. One of the things we had to do was maintain these global variables that referred to the publication and the author, and default values that we needed for the different galleries to work correctly. And as I was going through that process, it dawned on me that I was missing a very important tool that we just take for granted in the Access world, and that is the ability to move frequently, repetitively used code elements into a common location. We call it a module or a function or a sub within that module, where we just consolidate all of those scattered commands in one place. Maintenance becomes a great deal easier because if you change something, it only has to be changed in one location. You don't have to scout through all of your code to find where you might have used that same code or variable or something, and make sure that they're all changed in sync. That's how bugs sometimes get introduced into software. As a matter of fact, they will find a problem, they'll fix that problem, and then that has cascading effects elsewhere. They call that a regression. So the challenge for these so-called low-code apps like PowerApps is that we really don't have a way to consolidate code. Every time you want to set a variable, you have to actually say set the variable. And the same would be true for all kinds of other things that you would want to do over and over and over again. Every time you want to do that, you either write it from scratch or do a copy, paste, and modify. You can't consolidate. And so I thought I would start by showing you very quickly what I'm talking about here. Have an example of a small application has a form. Forms in Access, of course, are similar to but not identical with those in PowerApps. Forms in Access are standalone objects. They don't have to be part of a screen. But we have a save and close button on this form. It does three things as it's designed now. First, it saves the record. Then it closes the form and opens another form, which would be probably the main menu. Each of those three actions is available only to this form because it's in a private sub linked to this particular form. But they're all generic. You could do, or you could use those same lines of code in multiple forms. If you had a save and close button on 5 forms, you would be able to copy and paste this 5 times. But as I just got through saying, we don't really want to copy paste 5 times because that means that's 5 places we have to look for an update. What we want to do is take this code and consolidate it into a location. In this case, it will be a separate module where we can simply call that code. It'll be this code here. Tell it, I want to close this form, or the form where it's running, and yes or no, I want to open another form. It's a standalone reusable function. Here's what it would look like. It's public, which means that any form or report or anything in the application that wants to use this code can simply call it because it's public to the entire application. We've changed the reference to me, which is the form where it runs, to the form that we tell it to use. We pass it in by a reference. We refer to that form, and then when we want to save the records in it, close it, we do so with almost identical line of code, except now it is generic enough to be used with any form anywhere in the application. The third line of code here is now optional. We're going to tell it yes or no. If I say yes, if I pass in the value true through load main, then we will call this other little sub here. And this sub will open what amounts to the main menu for this application. And it will open it as a normal window, which is what you look at when you're working with it. In our subload form, we pass it again, the name of the form. This time it's the form we're going to open and what mode we're going to use. Then we issue the do command, open the form, open this form, that's the one we want. The view is going to be a normal view, and the mode is going to be whatever we tell it to be. So if it's normal, in this case, it opens as a normal form with borders. We have options like display or dialog, or some of the other window modes you could use. But that's really the advantage of this reusable kind of modular code that we like to write in a more complex application. And I just wanted to comment that I found myself really missing the ability to do this as I was working through these variables. Once we have it created, instead of the 5 lines of code that were there before, we now simply have the call to that particular sub, which is a public sub now in a different module. We tell it the name of the form and whether we want to load the main form or not, in this case not. So we've condensed 5 lines of code to 1, and now we can also take advantage of this and use it in every single form within the application that has a similar function and purpose and use. So with that, let's move on to our PowerApps and see what we have to do instead. Okay, with that background and the inability to consolidate all of my variable declarations into a single location, I'm going to go through all of the places where those variables are actually set and used in the current version of the Development Edition to Mike's mobile library. I'm going to start with the screen where we link publications with authors. It has the 2 galleries, one for publications, one for author, and then the 3rd gallery where we show the junction table. In order to make these paired galleries work the way I want them, I have to do 2 things. I first have to select a default or set a default so that when we arrive at this screen, the path that we follow to get here will determine whether or not any individual publication is already pre-selected to be the one we're going to work with, or whether we're going to come in and just accept the default, which is the first item in each gallery. As we're looking at it now, it's set to the out-of-the-box defaults with the first 2 items selected in the 2 galleries. If we come from a different direction, there are cases where we will want our default to come from a pre-existing selection in another screen. So we have to figure out a way to make our defaults work. The first step is to look at how the items are selected for this gallery. I know that's not what we're looking at as our end game, but to get there we have to go through this. I'm going to show you that really quickly. The items in this gallery are retrieved from the publication table. It's sorted by columns on the PubSort field, which is a calculated field that moves the word "the" to the end of the title, and then it's sorted in ascending order. This is really important because the next step where we set the default depends on this exact syntax. We will move from items to default. One of the interesting things I discovered after quite a bit of floundering was that in order to use a lookup to retrieve the default value, I had to do the lookup on exactly the same syntax as the items in the gallery are retrieved. Let me say that a little differently, maybe a little more clearly. This part of the lookup is a repeat, cut and paste, copy paste of the items for this gallery. We can do a lookup into this items source and get back a value for our default. If we don't, if we try to just do a straight lookup into the table publications table without copying this exact syntax, it doesn't work. I don't know why, but it doesn't. We do a lookup into that publication and we retrieve the publication ID of whatever our default publication ID was set in a prior location on our way to this screen. If we're coming from a brand new publication, say from the main menu, that will be 0. If we're coming from a selection in the publication screen itself, where we have already said I want to look at this publication, var default publication ID will be set to the value of that publication. So we'll either get 0 or nothing, or we'll get a record pointing to the previously selected publication, and that will be used as our default value in this gallery. Pause for a second, let you soak in that syntax. The same idea is true for the default value in our creator table, except that it has a little more complication involved. I'll show you the items in a second. But again, we have to copy the exact syntax that is used to generate the list of items for that gallery. The items source for this gallery, the creator gallery, is the creator table provides a last name, comma, first name. Then we get that value through our lookup by doing a coalesce on the default creator. Now, interestingly enough, this reflects a problem we ran into in a prior video, where sometimes, depending on which path we have taken to get here, this variable, the var default creator, will come in and we will be able to get the value we need from the uppercase, lowercase ID. And sometimes we will need to use the uppercase ID. I still don't know why that is different, but I have now put that trick in my brain. If I can't get the result I want, I make sure that I can get it by using something like this. And this is a new syntax for PowerApps. We haven't seen this in our sessions here, but this is something that VBA developers will recognize, the coalesce function. It simply says, pick the first of these values that is non-null or that has a value. So if there's nothing in this ID, we'll use this one. If there is something in it, we use it. We don't even worry about whether the other one has a value because it's going to be the same. And then we use that to do a lookup into this item source and highlight that as our default. So let's look real quickly, confirm that with the items. Oops, wrong. Too quick on the click. So there's that same syntax for the items. Now, we got here from a 0 location. I just came straight here. I did not go through the publications screen itself. So everything is set to the defaults. If we look at this from a, I wanted to see the default here. There is no default set for our publication and authors because this one is going to be straight filtered by whatever is selected in our first gallery, the publication gallery. We can look at the items for it. The items, and it is a filter on the publication creator table where the publication ID is equal to var publication. Now, and that means we're looking at some publication here in the publications table, and whatever authors are associated with that publication will be displayed here. So let's now run the entire application from the beginning and just step through there are actually 3 different paths to get here. We can go to it straight from the main menu. If we come from the main menu, we want everything defaulted to 0 blank. That's because we don't want to see the results of a prior selection. We want to come fresh, clean, reinitialized, as it were. So all of these values will be set to 0 or to a blank. If we come through publications, that means we have selected a publication here in this screen, and I'll click on this one. That will load that publication and eventually populate our little nested gallery with the title of the book and the cover and the author. If we come from here, I know 2 things already. I know the publication, so I want to set my default value to this particular publication, and I want the author to be set to this particular author because I know them already from looking at them right there on that screen. And this time when we get here, the code that I showed you selects as the default Bad Dirt, which is the publication, and the author, Annie Prohl. And of course, because we have selected these 2 here, we're going to see that in our gallery on the junction table. Let's go back out, come back in, and this time I'm going to go through the 3rd path, which is I'm going to add a new publication. I will set up a new publication. We'll call it Test. It is 1 book, and we'll say it is in very good condition. And now I'm just going to save it. All right, so if we come back here and do Test, there's that new publication I just entered. We'll edit it. And now I want to link an author to that publication. When we come in, scroll down through this until I find, there it has been set as the default, but no author has been selected. This is a bit confusing, potentially, and the reason that I added these little flags, there's one that we didn't see here because we know what we're looking at. We selected it in the previous screen. But I put this little flag to remind myself that even though the first item in the list is highlighted as the default, it is not selected yet because that may or may not be the actual author we want to use. And rather than overlook the fact that we have to make a positive selection, that's a reminder. So I'm just going to pick this one because I happen to know that there's nobody in my list of authors who wrote a book called Test. So I'll select Samuel Beckett, link them, and now they are linked. I can go back and my nested gallery updates with that linkage. Okay, so those are the 3 ways to get there. through the main menu, through an existing publication, or through a new publication. And basically, as you just saw, going through a new publication is only different up to the point where we actually save it, because then we end up going back, reselecting it, and coming back in. I could modify the code behind the save to say, to offer a choice. Say, do you want to add an author now, or do you just want to go back? And in a further refinement of this field or the screen, I'm sure that's something that I'll consider, whether to offer that as a choice. You hit the save button, save the publication, and then say, do you want to stay on this screen and select an author, or do you want to go back to the publications? Because the way it's set up now, it just defaults to going back there. Let's look at how all of these variables are set really quickly. Let's start with the startup screen. When we click the button, we set 7 variables. These are all variables we need to manage the paired galleries in our publications author screen. We set the publication to a blank. This will be a record because it is a blank record. We set the publication ID to 0. That will be a number because it is set to 0. Now notice, this is exactly why I reinitialize these variables when I come directly from the menu, because var publication ID has retained the value I set in the test book that I just entered. In order to avoid going back to that screen with a default set to an existing publication, and I'm coming in for my first time, and I don't want to see something else selected, I want to go there and start selecting, I will reinitialize that variable. Same for the creator ID, the publication creator ID. This is the one that does the lookup into the junction table. The default publication, again, the same thing. It's the one we just added, so we're going to reinitialize it. We're going to set the default publication ID to a 0, the default creator to blank, and the default creator ID to blank. Each of these variables is used in some way in controlling what happens in the publication author screen. And by reinitializing them all to blank or 0, when I leave this screen, I ensure that my experience is I arrive at publication authors with nothing set. It's a fresh new set of values as a beginning point. If I go through publications, I don't do that. I reinitialize my publication variable. Let's run this, click this, and now we arrive at this screen. As you saw, it updated itself when I got here. When it first got here, it had retained the original selection, but because I have updated those values in the variables, it reset itself back to the blank and blank. And I see I have another little hitch here, which I'm not going to worry about for this video. This should have reset my flag field here, but I'll worry about that later. That's part of the testing and testing and testing process. Okay, let's go back to this screen. We'll go through publications. Let's see. And we will select the bell jar. And that will bring me back here. And now I can look at what's behind this button. it again. The first thing we do is save whatever has been written into those controls on this screen by the time we get here. We either update or add. I won't go through that save code. We've seen that in prior videos. Then we set 6 variables. And these again are the publication that we're going to work with and the default, so that when we get to that gallery, we will have a default available. We set the value of the default publication to whatever publication we're looking at here. So var publication will hold this record. And so we're going to make that the default as well. The publication ID is the publication ID for that record that we're looking at. The default publication ID is the same value. The publication creator ID, we're going to look into the publication creator table, our junction table, using the current publication and bring back the primary key for that record in the publication creator table. And then finally, we're going to use that to bring back the creator ID associated with that publication. And remember, I mentioned this 2 or 3 times, but Lookup finds the first matching record. Looks into the junction table, finds the primary key for the record that we wanted that matches the publication, and brings back the first available creator ID. If there are none, then it will bring back nothing. And then we set the creator ID to the value of the ID field in that creator record we just brought back. Now this is a place where I could also use that coalesce to ensure that whatever happens, I get a value. This is probably what you might think of as defensive coding, and at some point I will have mastered enough of this to know that I don't have to do it. Okay, so I'm using coalesce to guard against the possibility that one or the other is blank or empty or 0 or null. Format my text, double check that I didn't introduce an error by doing that, and now we can move on. We run it. It will reset all of those variables after it saves the current values. If I've made any changes, they will be saved, and then it will bring me back here and use the defaults that I just set to place me here. So those are the ways we can get here and the methods we have to use to get the defaults. I think we have one more to look at, and that is what happens if we come through this path. If we come through this path, we set publication to blank because we're going to add a new one. So we want to zero out or reinitialize everything. We set the publication to blank, all the other variables that are used in setting up a new publication. These are all the defaults that are used in our drop downs for the genre type and publisher and so on. We don't have any other defaults yet because we're not at the point where we're actually going to start processing our publication creator links. If on a prior run we have set, say, a different creator as the default, that will still be sitting out there in memory, but we won't run into it because when we run this, we won't get there without going through this link. Okay, so I've shown you pretty much everything that we need to see to understand how the various variables have to be set or reset or initialized to ensure that when we finally do get to the author-creator screen, it behaves the way we want it to behave using the variables, and the values that those variables represent the way we want them. It would be, as I've said a couple of times in this video, it would be really nice to be able to just manage all those variables from a central location and just say, give me the variable set for a new record. Give me the variable set for an existing record. I have a publication, I'm going to add a creator. Give me the variables that do that, and so on. But since we don't have it, we have to do the copy-paste approach, which isn't really that cumbersome. The number isn't that great, but trust me, sorting through all of the paths and making sure that the paths all were clean when they got there was a little more more than I originally anticipated. Let's put it that way. So I've gone quite a bit longer in this video than in some of the others, and I appreciate your patience as we've worked our way to this point. That'll wrap it up for today. If you like what you have seen, or if you've learned something, or even found something interesting, please subscribe and smash that like button to let me know that you've seen it and liked it. In the next installment, I'm going to come back and pick up how do we delete existing publications, and how do we go about deleting linkages between publications and creators. I kind of have a new thing that I just figured out, and I'm looking forward to showing it to you.